The morning I decided to sell the house, I was standing in the backyard with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, looking at the fence my husband built the summer before he got sick. It was a Tuesday, early April, the kind of morning where the light hits the grass at an angle that makes everything look like it used to, and for a few seconds, you forget that the person who planted those rose bushes along the back fence isn't coming home anymore. Gerald had been gone for 2 years and 4 months. I know the exact number because grief doesn't let you stop counting, even when you want to. I set the cup down on the porch railing and walked back inside. The house was quiet in the way that big houses get quiet when they've been full of people for decades and then suddenly aren't. 4 bedrooms, a formal dining room we used every Thanksgiving for 31 years, a kitchen where I had made more casseroles, more birthday cakes, more Sunday roasts than I could ever count. The refrigerator still had a drawing on it. Stick figures, a house, a sun with a face, that my younger son had made in 2nd grade. I had never taken it down. I wasn't sure why. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop and looked up the number for a real estate agent whose name I had written on a notepad 6 months earlier and then folded and put in a drawer. I stared at the number for a long time. Then I called. Her name was Pam, and she had a kind voice and didn't try to rush me. When I told her I wanted to sell a 4-bedroom colonial in Ashford Heights, she asked if I had a timeline in mind. I said I was thinking spring. She said that was perfect timing. Market was strong. Buyers were motivated. I said that was good to hear. What I didn't say was that the real reason I was selling had nothing to do with the market, or the size of the house, or the property taxes that had been climbing every year. The real reason was that I was 63 years old, and I was tired of being the person everyone assumed would always be there, in that house, available, ready, paying for things, making things happen, absorbing whatever needed to be absorbed. I was tired of being the fixture. Gerald had been the one who said it first, about 8 months before he died. We were sitting on the back porch and he looked at me and said, "Bev." I said, "Don't." He said, "I just want to say it." I let him say it. He said he worried about me, not about the finances. He had taken care of that, carefully, over many years, and I would be all right. He worried about the other thing. The way our sons had grown into men who loved me in the abstract but treated me like a resource in the particular. The way their wives smiled at me warmly at holidays and then called with requests in January. The way they talked about the house like it was a family asset, a shared property, something that existed for their benefit, rather than the home their father and I had bought in 1987 with a down payment we had saved for 6 years. "You have permission," Gerald said. "Whatever you decide to do. You have my full permission." I told him I didn't need his permission. He smiled. He said, "I know. I'm giving it anyway." I thought about that conversation a lot in the 2 years after he died. I thought about it on the Tuesday morning in April when I called Pam. I thought about it when I signed the listing agreement and when the first offer came in and when I accepted it. I thought about it when I did not tell my sons. I should explain something about my sons. I love them. I want to be clear about that first, because what comes later might make it seem like I don't, and that isn't true. I love them in the deep cellular way that mothers love children they carried and raised and worried about for decades. But loving someone and excusing their behavior are 2 different things, and I had spent a long time confusing the 2. My older son, I'll call him my older son, because names don't matter as much as the pattern, is 53. He works in commercial real estate. He has a wife named Denise and 2 teenage children and a house in the suburbs that is larger than the one he grew up in. He makes good money. He has always made good money. When his father was alive, he came to Sunday dinners and ate well and left early and called on birthdays, and that was roughly the shape of our relationship. My younger son is 49. He works in tech sales. His wife is named Catherine, and she is perfectly pleasant when she wants something and perfectly unavailable when she doesn't. They have 1 child, a boy of 9 who calls me Grandma June and is the best part of all of this. After Gerald died, both sons flew home for the funeral, stayed for 4 days, helped with the logistics, and then went back to their lives. That was reasonable. That was what adult children do. I understood it. What happened afterward was something else. The calls started about 3 months after Gerald passed. Not calls to check on me, calls with items. My older son needed to know if we still had Gerald's old fishing gear because he wanted it. My younger son needed to know if I could watch his son for a week in June because they had a trip planned. Denise called to ask if she could have the hutch from the dining room because it would look good in their entryway. Catherine sent a text asking if I could help cover some unexpected car repairs because money was tight that month. It wasn't the first time, and it wasn't the last. I said yes to most of it. I said yes because I was grieving, and saying yes felt like being connected to something, and saying no felt like being alone. I was already alone. I just hadn't let myself understand that yet. The Christmas after Gerald died, I hosted. Of course I hosted. 22 people. I cooked for 2 days. I bought gifts for everyone, including the children of the children, and I wrapped them myself with the good ribbon from the craft store on Millbrook Avenue that I had been buying every year since 1994. My older son arrived 40 minutes late and did not apologize. My younger son spent most of dinner on his phone. Denise told me the turkey was a little dry. Catherine asked at the table, in front of everyone, if I had thought about what I was going to do with the house, now that it was just me. I said I hadn't decided yet. She said it seemed like a lot of house for one person. I said yes, it was. She smiled and speared a piece of sweet potato. That was the Christmas I started quietly deciding things. It took me 14 months from that Christmas to the Tuesday morning in April when I called Pam. In those 14 months, I did several things that I did not announce. I spent a weekend in a small city 3 hours away called Claremont Falls, where my friend Roberta had been living for 8 years. Roberta and I had been friends since we were 26, and she was one of the few people in my life who told me the truth without using it as a weapon. She had a guest room with a blue quilt and a coffee maker on the counter, and a neighborhood where you could walk to a bookstore and a bakery and a decent wine bar. She had been asking me to visit for years. I visited. I walked around. I looked at apartment listings on my phone while Roberta pretended not to notice, and then noticed and asked what I was looking at, and I showed her and she didn't say anything. She just squeezed my hand. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in a building 4 blocks from Roberta's house with tall windows and hardwood floors and a little balcony that faced west. The building had a name, the Alderton, and it was the kind of building that had a doorman and a small lobby with plants in it and felt like somewhere a person could breathe. I put my name on a waiting list. 2 months later, they called. I signed a lease. I paid the security deposit and the first month's rent from a personal account my sons did not know about. Gerald and I had always kept some separate savings. His idea, one of many good ones. And I had added to mine quietly over the years for reasons I could not have fully explained, except that something in me always understood that one day I might need to leave a room quickly. I arranged for the movers in early June. I told Pam I wanted to close before the end of May. She said it was doable. The buyers, a young couple, first home, visibly excited, agreed to a May 28th closing. I did not tell my sons about the apartment. I did not tell my sons about the sale. I did not tell my sons about any of it. What I told them was nothing. And the nothing held because they weren't asking. The call came on a Saturday in late April, my older son. I saw his name on the screen and answered the way I always did, with the same warmth I had been giving him his whole life regardless of how long it had been since he'd called. He asked how I was. I said I was fine. He said, good, good. And then there was a small pause where I could hear him shifting toward the actual reason for the call. He said he had been talking to his brother and they had an idea. For Mother's Day, I said that was nice. He said they wanted to do something special this year, something bigger. They were thinking of renting out the back pavilion at Beaumont's. Did I know Beaumont's? The nice one, out on Route 9, the one with the garden view. I knew Beaumont's. Gerald and I had gone there for our 30th anniversary. It was not inexpensive. My son said they were thinking a big family lunch. Immediate family, plus the grandchildren, plus Denise's parents and Catherine's sister and her husband, because they would be in town. He said it would be 18 people, maybe 20. I said that sounded like a lot. He said it would be great, really a proper celebration. A full afternoon. They were going to order from the prix-fixe menu. The prix-fixe at Beaumont's on a Sunday was $210 a head before drinks. I did a quick mental calculation. I let the number sit in my chest for a moment. Then I asked who was handling the reservation. My son said Denise was going to call on Monday. I asked who was covering the bill. There was a pause. The kind of pause that is not really a pause, but a recalibration. A moment where someone shifts their weight because the conversation has gone somewhere they didn't expect. He said, "Well, Mom, it's Mother's Day." So we figured. I said, "You figured I'd cover it." He said it wasn't quite like that. It was just, it was a family thing. And I was the. I said, "The what?" He said, "Mom." I said his name back to him. I said it the way I used to say it when he was 15 and had done something he knew perfectly well was wrong. He said they would all contribute something. Of course, he just thought, given the house and everything. I said, "The house." He said, "Yes, it was a lot of space for one person, and the mortgage was paid off, and it was just, financially, they thought." I said, "I see." He said, "Was I upset?" He hadn't meant to upset me. They were doing this for me. I said I understood. I told him it sounded like a lovely idea. I told him to have Denise make the reservation. He sounded relieved. He said, "Great, it was going to be really wonderful, a real celebration." I said I was sure it would be. We hung up. I sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then I picked up my phone again and called Roberta and told her the whole thing. And Roberta said, in the voice she uses when she is being extremely precise, "Are you going to go?" I said, "No." Roberta said, "Good." Here is what I did not tell my son on that phone call. The closing on the house was May 28th. Mother's Day was the Sunday before that, May 12th, which meant that on the day my sons were planning a 20-person lunch at Beaumont's that I was supposed to fund, I would still technically own the house. But the week before, I would have moved. The movers were booked for May 4th and 5th. By May 12th, the house would be empty, cleaned, and staged for the final walkthrough. I would have been living in the Alderton apartment in Claremont Falls for 8 days. I had also, in the preceding weeks, done a few other things. I had met with Gerald's estate attorney, a quiet, thorough man named Mr. Okafor, and updated my own will. My sons were still beneficiaries, but I had restructured things in ways that were fair and clear, and that removed a great deal of the ambiguity that people tend to exploit when they assume a parent's finances are also, in some loose sense, a family resource. I had closed a joint account I had maintained with my older son for what was originally meant to be household emergency purposes and had gradually become something else. I had transferred the ownership of Gerald's vintage Buick Riviera, which both sons had been loosely assuming would eventually come to one of them, to a private collector who had been trying to buy it for 2 years and had made a very fair offer. I donated the money to the hospital where Gerald had spent his last 6 weeks. I had been meaning to do that for a long time. And I had written a letter. Not a dramatic letter, not an angry one, a factual one. I had written it on Gerald's old stationery, the cream-colored paper with our address embossed at the top. Our old address, which would no longer be our address by the time they read it. I wrote it by hand, which took me 3 attempts because my handwriting isn't what it used to be. I explained what I had done. I explained why. I said I loved them and I was not disappearing. I was relocating, and there was a difference. I said I hoped they could understand in time what I had not been able to say out loud. I put the letters in envelopes. I sealed them. I asked Pam to leave them on the kitchen counter of the empty house on closing day, with a note on the outside of each that said, "Please read before you call me." Then I finished packing. May 4th was a Saturday. The movers arrived at 8 in the morning, which I had requested, and they were efficient and careful, and by 3 in the afternoon, the house was mostly empty. I had kept very little. My bedroom furniture, the reading chair Gerald had given me for my 55th birthday, the kitchen things I actually used, the books that mattered, the photographs, the blue and white quilt my mother had made. Everything else I had sold, given away, or donated over the preceding weeks, quietly, in the way that you can accomplish a great deal when no one is watching, because no one is paying attention. The last things I took from the house was the refrigerator drawing, the stick figures, the house, the sun with a face. I had finally taken it down the week before, and I had kept it flat between two pieces of cardboard, and I put it in the car myself rather than giving it to the movers. I drove away from the house on Fairbrook Lane on a Saturday afternoon in May, with that drawing on the passenger seat and Roberta's voice in my earbuds, telling me to take the highway because the back roads would add 40 minutes. I did not stop and look at the house one last time. I had already done that the night before, alone, walking through every room in the dark, saying whatever needed to be said to a place that had held my whole life for 36 years. I had said what I needed to say to Gerald's garden and Gerald's fence and the kitchen where I had cooked 10,000 meals and the bedroom where we had slept side by side for so long that for months after he died, I kept waking up on my side of the bed, confused that the other side was cold. I said all of it. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and went to sleep on the air mattress I had kept for the last night. In the morning, the movers came. The Alderton was everything I had hoped it would be, and also, in the way of real things as opposed to imagined things, slightly different. The ceilings were higher than I remembered from the showing. The kitchen was smaller. The balcony was narrow but faced exactly west, and on the evening of May 4th I stood on it with a glass of wine. Roberta had brought and watched the sun go down behind the low hills on the other side of the city, and something in me that had been clenched for a very long time, for 2 years, or maybe much longer than that, began slowly to release. Roberta said, "You okay?" I said. "I think I might be getting there." She touched my arm. She didn't say anything else. Roberta is very good at knowing when nothing else needs to be said. The apartment smelled like new paint and someone else's history, and by the end of the first week, it smelled like my coffee and my hand cream and the candles I had started burning in the evenings, and it smelled like mine. Mother's Day was a Sunday. I woke up early, which I always do, and made coffee and opened the balcony door and sat in the reading chair I had put near the window that faced the street. The morning was cool and bright. I could hear the city in its Sunday way, quieter than weekdays, a slower rhythm. I had turned off notifications on my phone the night before, not because I was hiding, because I wanted one morning, just one, that belonged to me entirely. At 9:30, I turned them back on. There were 14 missed calls, 6 texts, 2 voicemails. I poured a second cup of coffee and sat down and listened to the voicemails first. The first was from Denise. Her voice was careful in the way that voices get careful when someone is trying not to sound panicked. She said she was just calling to confirm. Just wanted to make sure I was still planning to come. They were all at Beaumont's now. Everyone was there. It was very nice. Just wanted to confirm. The second was from my younger son. His voice was different, less careful. He said that Mom, they were all at the restaurant, 18 people they had ordered, and he didn't know where I was, and could I please call him back? And he said it the way he used to say it when he was 12 and needed me to come pick him up from somewhere, and I was the only one who could fix it. I read the texts. Some were practical. A few were escalating. My older son's last message, sent at 1:47 in the afternoon, said, "Mom, nobody has a credit card with enough room. Please call." I sat with that for a while. The prefix at Beaumont's, 18 people. Plus drinks, presumably, because nobody at that table was the type to skip the drinks. Probably over $4,000 on Mother's Day that they had arranged for me to pay. I thought about the house on Fairbrook Lane, empty and clean, waiting for its new family. I thought about the letters sitting on the kitchen counter. I thought about the young couple who was going to move in at the end of the month and paint the front door red, which they had mentioned during the final walkthrough, with a kind of excitement that reminded me of being young and starting something. I thought about Gerald on the back porch saying, "You have permission." I typed a text back to my younger son. I said, "I'm in Claremont Falls. There are letters at the house. I love you. Please read the letters before you call." Then I put my phone face down on the table and finished my coffee. They called anyway, several times. I let it go to voicemail. The calls eventually stopped, the way all urgent things eventually stop when the urgency can't be resolved by the person they're directed at. I understood they had figured something out. A collection between 18 people, a manager with some patience, something. They were adults. They were capable of solving a financial problem that they had created themselves. I had raised them to be capable people, even if somewhere along the way they had forgotten to act like it. My older son drove to the house that afternoon. He called me from the driveway, standing in front of a house that was visibly empty, where the curtains were gone and the planter by the front door that had always had red geraniums in it was now bare, and he said, "Mom, what happened to the house?" It wasn't quite a question, I said. "Read the letter," he said. "I'm standing outside. I don't have a key." I said Pam had left a spare under the mat for exactly this reason, which she had, because I had asked her to. He went inside. He found the letter. He called me back 20 minutes later, and his voice was very different, quieter, slower, with something in it that I had not heard in a very long time. He said, "I didn't know you were this unhappy." I said I hadn't been unhappy. I said unhappy wasn't the right word. I said I had been invisible, and those were two very different things. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "The Buick is gone too." I said yes. He said, "Dad loved that car." I said I knew. I said. I also knew that the money from it was now funding a new cardiac unit at the hospital where his father had died, and I thought Gerald would have liked that considerably more than either of his sons driving it to a golf course on weekends. My son made a sound I couldn't quite interpret. I think it might have been a laugh, or something adjacent to one. He said, "Where are you?" I told him. I told him about Claremont Falls and the Alderton and the balcony and Roberta 4 blocks away and the bookstore and the bakery and the wine bar. I told him I had a life here now, or the beginning of one, and that he was welcome to come visit when he was ready to visit someone who lived on her own terms. He said, "Mom." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry, I think. I'm still processing." I said that was all right. Processing was a reasonable response. I had been processing for 2 years and 4 months, and he'd had about 45 minutes, so I was willing to be patient. He didn't laugh at that, but I think he almost did. My younger son read the letter a week later. He called on a Tuesday evening, which is when he does his best thinking, always has been. He didn't start with an apology, which I respected more than I would have respected a reflexive one. He started with a question. He said, "Why didn't you tell us you were this close to the edge?" I said I hadn't been close to any edge. I said the edge he was imagining wasn't the one that existed. I said the thing that had needed to change wasn't my capacity to cope. It was the arrangement, the assumption. The way I had been folded into the infrastructure of other people's lives for so long that everyone, including sometimes me, had forgotten I was a person with a separate center. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "When Catherine asked about the house at Christmas," I said, "Yes," he said. "That was bad." I said it had not been a great moment. He said, "I should have said something." I said he should have. I said I should have said something too, and I hadn't. And we were both responsible for the silence that had grown between us over years of small omissions and comfortable assumptions, and that the point wasn't to assign blame but to understand that the silence was over. Now. The arrangement was over. Something new could begin if we wanted it to, on clearer terms. He said he wanted that. I said I did too. Closing day was May 28th. I drove back to Ashford Heights the night before and stayed at a hotel near the old house, which was strange and clarifying, to be a guest in a town where I had lived for 36 years. I met with Mr. O'Coffer in the morning. I signed the papers in a conference room that smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner while Pam sat across from me, smiling in the way she had been smiling since the first offer came in. I shook the hands of the young couple who were buying the house. The woman had red hair and was clearly trying not to be visibly emotional. The man kept straightening his collar. They thanked me for leaving the yard so well maintained and for the note I had left about the rose bushes. Which kind, how much water, what to expect in June. I told them the fence in the back was solid. I said my husband had built it himself, and he had done it right. The woman said, "Thank you for taking such good care of it." I said, "Thank you for letting me know it's in good hands." I walked out of the conference room with a check and a lightness I had not felt in years, possibly decades, and I got in my car and drove back to Claremont Falls. It's been 5 months since Mother's Day. I'm telling this now because enough time has passed that I can see it clearly rather than just feel it. My older son came to visit in July. He stayed for a weekend. He brought his son, who is 15 and taller than his father and extremely interested in a vintage record shop 2 blocks from the Alderton that I had already discovered was a dangerous place for my budget. We had dinner at a good Italian restaurant on Friday night, and on Saturday we walked along the river path and he asked me questions about his grandfather that he had never asked before, and I answered all of them, and it was the best conversation we had had in years. He hugged me when he left. He held on for a moment longer than usual. He said, "I'm glad you're okay." I said I was better than okay. I meant it. My younger son is coming in October. He's bringing his wife and my grandson. I have bought a second air mattress for the guest room and found a good pancake place 6 blocks away that I believe will redeem the entire visit. The apartment is mine. The mornings are mine. The coffee is good, and the balcony faces west, and every evening when the light comes in through the tall windows, it looks like something I chose, because it is. Gerald's stationery is on the desk in the second bedroom, the cream paper with the embossed address that is no longer our address. I've kept it, not because I plan to write more letters explaining myself. I think I'm done explaining, but because it was his, and I loved him, and some things you keep simply for that reason, with no justification required. The rose bushes on Fairbrook Lane are blooming. According to a photo the young woman texted me last week. She had remembered to ask me before planting season, like I suggested. She sent the picture and wrote, "Your husband knew what he was doing." I wrote back and said yes, he really did.